Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And we're kicking off December with another global gonzo. We took a week off, and the week prior we did Mystics in Bali, which is one of our, I think one of our best movies that we watched for the show this year. Really fun episode too. We're doing sort of a Christmassy themed month with a couple of movies here, and we wanted to kick it off with another global gonzo. This has got a number of titles. I'm going to call it DIAL CODE Santa Claus, but it's also known as Deadly Games. You can find it under that title on the streaming service Shudder in the US right now.
It's also called Game Over. Its original French title is 3615 Code Père Noël. Whole bunch of different names for this movie, but fact of the matter is you can go get it on Shudder right now under Deadly Games.
Yes, but I'm going to call it DIAL CODE Santa Claus because I think that's the best title.
Before we talk about that, I do believe we have a new patron at patreon.com/GenreVision.
Nikki, thank you so much for becoming one of our premium GenreVision subscribers. Nikki now has access to the ever-growing library of additional content, weekly pre-shows, extended currently consumings, all sorts of stuff for the GenreVision network of shows. Thank you so much, Nikki. If you want to be cool like Nikki, head over to patreon.com/GenreVision and sign up for a premium subscription for just $5 a month. And we also get to celebrate in calls to action because we have 2 new reviews on the Apple Podcast Store. The first one comes from Night Flare from Canada. 5 stars, awesome podcast. This is one of my favorite podcasts, and I find myself re-listening to episodes again and again just because I enjoy the excellent conversations. They are consistently entertaining and thought-provoking and have opened my eyes and caused me to reevaluate movies which I previously hated. Wow, thank you so much, Night Flare. That's a big pat on our back. And then the next review comes from Monster Guts. 5 stars, an absolute must for movie geeks. I've trudged through a lot of movie podcasts, and GenreVision had me hooked from the first episode I listened to. Intelligent discussions of movies that a lot of reviewers don't take the time to dive into while making it very fun and informative. Always look forward to new episodes. Highly recommended. Thank you so much, Monster Guts. Thank you so much, Night Flare. Leaving a review on the Apple Podcast Store is one of the absolute best things you can do for the show right now.
Yes, every single review on Apple Podcasts pushes us higher in the rankings on Apple Podcasts and increases visibility for the show, bringing new listeners into the fold. So again, thanks very much to Night Flare from Canada and Monster Guts from the US.
And last but not least, we do want to announce that we released our season finale episode of Finflix on the film Anaconda. I love Finflix, and I've really enjoyed doing this season. Anaconda, it is got to be one of our best episodes. It's really good. It's
a great episode, great movie. Love Anaconda. Make no mistake. Anaconda is a really, really fun flick, and we dive headfirst into that on Finflix. Finflix, while that second season is over, Finflix is not going away. Finflix will return next week, right here on this very feed. Next week's episode is none other than Jaws: The Revenge.
Yes, we're doing a special crossover GenreVision Finflix episode because it's our Finflix Christmas special. We've talked about privately doing this for a long time and doing Jaws Revenge as the Christmas special, and we figured, hey, we're going to do it for GenreVision listeners too. So I hope you'll check that out next week. But now let us talk about our global gonzo this week, a film from France, which we've said its many titles. Again, I'm going to call it DIAL CODE Santa Claus. This is a movie I was only alerted to maybe a couple years ago because it kind of got rediscovered and reassessed and was making the rounds kind of in repertory theater screenings. And the way that I had heard about this movie was that it was sold that it's the movie that Home Alone ripped off. And I certainly see why it got that. That was kind of the log line for people to be like, hey, check this out. You like Home Alone. Actually, this movie did something similar first. Not exactly. If you kind of boiled the story down in that a young kid has to fight against an intruder in his house by setting up kind of various cartoonish traps, that does happen in DIAL CODE Santa Claus a couple years before Home Alone came out in theaters. But they are by no means the same kind of movie.
Not at all. This is a movie that I think American audiences wouldn't really be prepared for because tonally, it doesn't really settle into a familiar groove for American audiences. And it's also one of these movies that wouldn't settle into an American rating very easily. I think the film as is would be rated R in American cinemas, but obviously that wouldn't really do well. So, I mean, the lead in the movie is 9 years old, I think. And it's the director's son. The director is this French guy named René Manzor, and he wrote the film, directed the film. It was clearly a passion project of his, and he cast his son in the lead role.
Yes, and the story essentially boils down to that this lead kid, Thomas, played by Alan Lalaine, he is this very rich kid. He lives in this beautiful, just fairy tale of a mansion.
It's like a big chateau, very castle-y with, big, almost like towers. It looks like Hogwarts. It really does.
Yeah.
It's very, very fantastical. His mom is a big executive for the French department store Printemps. And so, I think they imply that the mom is widowed and the father is dead. I don't think they ever explicitly say that, but there is a moment early on in the film that implies this sort of, sad acknowledgement that, the kid is very much his father's son as well. And there's this awkward dinner table moment where they're all kind of smiling sadly at one another. And the implication is enough that it's, the dad's gone, presumed to be a death. The film opens, however, with a way bolder thematic statement, and it actually opens up with a quote, which did not bode well. I mean, when movies open up with quotes, it's usually a sign that the movie's got, its head up its ass a little bit, at least in my estimation. The opening quote is from somebody named Bruno Bettelheim, and the quote translated is, "All children believe in magic and cease to do so only when they grow up, except for those who have been too disappointed by reality to expect any reward from it." So the movie's just telling you immediately what it's about on a thematic level. And then right after that, you get this other big thematic statement, but this time it's visual. You see the Eiffel Tower and the Paris cityscape blanketed in beautiful snow, but then the camera pulls back to reveal that it's all inside a snow globe. And then a garbage truck runs over the snow globe. It's basically like, look, adult reality is here to fuck up your Christmas fantasy.
Yeah, and here's the thing, and this is getting a little personal, and Christmas movies in general, I think are really interesting because I think they illuminate a lot about people's views about Christmas. And for me, I like a lot of what I would consider Christmas movies, but they are not what I would also describe as kind of the typical warm, fuzzy Christmas movies, because I like Christmas movies, for the most part, that kind of get at the beautiful lie that is Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
Christmas, is this, I mean, it's a lie in that it's amalgamated from a bunch of different, pagan religions and stuff, but has been co-opted. But more so, I think it's really fascinating as a narrative thing in that it is supposed to be the darkest, coldest time of the year. But in that, we lie to ourselves and create this narrative in this holiday that is all centered around warmth and community and love and all of this kind of stuff. And that lie is magical. Like there is something beautifully magical about that lie that we tell ourselves, during the holiday season. And I really like movies that acknowledge that. And Dial Code Santa Claus, like you're saying, is directly, blatantly stating that with its opening quote from Bruno Bettelheim, which it's from a book about analyzing fairy tales and fantasy storytelling for children.
Right.
Like saying it's like what they're, what they kind of get out of these stories. And then this image of this snow globe of the Eiffel Tower being crushed by a garbage truck. We're then introduced to who will end up being our antagonist in the film, who is never given a name. He is just credited as Santa. And this is played by Patrick Florsheim, and he seems to be this stunted man-child of a person who seems to be kind of stuck in a an adolescent's mindset.
Kind of. I mean, they don't elucidate a whole lot about him, and that's one of the reasons he maintains his sort of, scariness in the movie. He does have a sort of Michael Myers-ish aura about him. The scene where we see him first is, there's the snow globe scene, and then we see a whole bunch of kids in the streets of Paris throwing snowballs. And it's great footage. It's a fun way to introduce the film. And then when he shows up and starts to join or try to join the snowball fight, all the kids scream and run away. And you can see this kind of broken look on his face, like, what happened? What's wrong with me? We then meet Tommy, and, the implication, as we meet Tommy in his, first few scenes is that this kid lives an absurd fantasy life. With his mom being this extravagantly wealthy person who, clearly has a high position in this, department store. She is able to, give him the childhood of his dreams with all the toys he wants. Like, we first see him asleep in the cockpit of an old fighter plane. And the sort of sounds of war are, all around him. And, he's living in this persistent sort of fantasy where he is Rambo, he is the fighter pilot. And, and the implication here is that this kid is so deep in his fantasy because he is one of these kids who's been too disappointed by reality. And I think that is tied into the implied death of the father. Whatever the reason for the father's absence is, I think that is the disappointment that they're talking about with that opening quote.
Well, and the arc of this is going to be that Thomas, who is playing war, when we see him, he has basically the commando suit up montage.
Yeah. Well, and they have a rip-off version of the Eye of the Tiger, which is, not gonna lie, pretty bad. The guitars, it's so clearly Eye of the Tiger, but then the lyrics come in, and I don't know who's singing it, but it's like, Mr. Christmas, Mr. X. I'm like, what's going on with this?
It's not the fact that it's bad, it's how blatant a ripoff of Eye of the Tiger it is. It is possibly legally actionable how close it is to Eye of the Tiger.
It's so close, but the way that they managed to capture the commando suit up and camouflage paint montage, it's like, oh, clearly this director knows what he's doing from a style standpoint.
Oh, we will get deep into the weeds on that in a bit, but so what it ends up being is that Thomas, he's staying at this mansion with his grandfather, who is very blind, and it is Christmas Eve, and Thomas wants to stay up and see Santa Claus because he has a friend, Pilou, who is all about, like, Santa Claus isn't real, your parents do this and all this, and they have this great conversation in the first conversation with the family, and they talk about, it's like, oh, Thomas says, Pilou says Santa Claus isn't real. And the mom says, well, of course he's not real for Pilou because he's a bad kid and doesn't believe in him. Like, if you believe in him, then he's real. So Thomas still believes in Santa Claus and wants to stay up and has all of these cameras rigged up across the mansion to film Santa Claus, and he's going to hide out and everything. Meanwhile, our eventual Santa Claus continues to go down this very bizarre rabbit hole in which he walks into the department store because they're searching for people to play Santa, because the mom has decided that after this this breakfast conversation rather, about Santa not being real, she wants to throw a big party in the streets to remind people that Santa Claus is real.
Well, and she wants, Santa Claus, actors playing Santa Claus at every Printemps department store. Now, we've skipped an important plot point here, and it involves an obscure piece of French telecommunications history.
Has that already happened at this point?
It has.
Okay.
So let's inform everybody about Minitel, because I didn't really know about Minitel until this movie. Minitel is sort of like a bizarre little French internet project that came about in the early 80s. And so they had computers specifically built to communicate on this Minitel network. Early in the film, in the snowball fight scene, you see the antagonist character standing in front of this big advertisement that shows Santa with a Minitel computer, coming out of the bag on his back. And then it has a code that you can dial into your Minitel machine to talk to Santa, quote unquote. And so that code is 3615, which is where the French title of the film comes from. So Tommy and Pilou, on their Minitel machine, try to dial up Santa. And this is where Tommy is trying to convince Pilou that Santa is real. And Tommy ends up striking up a conversation with a person he believes to be Santa. Turns out the person on the other end is our antagonist character, who is at a public Minitel station in the streets of Paris. And he is trying to find out where this kid lives. He actually asks the kid what his address is. And Tommy says, well, you're Santa. You're supposed to know everything. What do you mean you don't know my address? But then Tommy volunteers a critical piece of information. He says, if you want the letter that the handwritten letter that I've written to you, you can go get it from my mom. She's one of the high ups at Printemps. And so he goes, the villain goes to Printemps and figures out, they're hiring people to play Santa Claus.
And when he becomes Santa Claus, he has just, the typical kind of easy costume and fake beard on. And we get this shot of him as this, big celebrations going on. And a little girl comes up to him and sits on his lap, and he's, tenderly stroking her cheek and all this stuff. But then she calls him out, and she's like, you're not the real Santa, and pulls his fake beard off. And he backs up and hits her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he gets fired on the spot too.
Sure. I mean, as he should.
Yep.
This continues this break in this character, because after this, now he is, now that he has this information about Thomas, he discovers that there's going to be a delivery made to Thomas's house, which is going to be the toys for Christmas and everything. And so he ends up hijacking this delivery. And he also, I think he gets a different Santa Claus outfit at some point.
I'm not sure if he gets a different costume. From what it looks like, it appears to be the same costume, but what he does once he manages to find his way to Thomas's house, the big sort of fantasy castle where Thomas lives, is that he finds like a spray-on hair color and sprays his hair and beard white.
Yeah, before that, he shows up there, and there are these caretakers at the house, which I guess he kills.
Yeah, that's the implication.
Yeah, the implication is that they're gone. Then after this, he takes this snow spray can that's there in their little caretaker house. And he has this scene where he's just staring in the mirror, spraying his hair and beard white, and he's like giggling like a kid. And then we get this transition to him sitting in this rocking chair where he's staring at the clock, waiting for it to turn to midnight, because he knows that's when he can go and be Santa.
And this film, like, it is showing its chops as a horror film. Like, you watch the film in total, and it doesn't necessarily always come across like a horror film in general. It's like this weird, contained dark thriller. But this is really well versed in the visual language of horror and is genuinely creepy a lot of the time, even when it's being sort of big and fantastical.
Well, yeah, it's a big fantasy movie as a production. I mean, we haven't really talked about the filmmaking yet, because I think we could just spend the entire podcast talking about the filmmaking of this movie. It's so fascinating, and so Travis continued to say when we were doing our screening of it, he's like, it's very clear that the director had a vision, had a very particular idea and image of what he wanted to capture. And a big part of that is that this movie was primarily shot in what wasn't an actual studio space, but a space that was converted into a studio. So this is all taking place on sets. It's all taking place in interior locations, and even the exteriors of certain locations are being, fabricated in a stage. And the thing is, the movie is totally aware of its fabricated nature. I think even opening the movie with a snow globe, we see shots of the mansion, which are an actual, like, I think it was like, I can't remember the scale exactly, but it's a model of the house. It was a very big model.
Yeah, it's probably a 6th scale model. The miniature of the house is astounding. It looks so cool. And it looks like a miniature, but that actually heightens the sort of fantasy element because they light it so beautifully and they have the fake snow falling on it. And it really does look like a snow globe. And it's really extraordinary. The stage-bound feel of the movie and the sort of artifice of it is never a negative. And, the director, René Manzor, knew that this would defy conventional French filmmaking at the time because, in the late 80s or early 90s in France, like, you made movies on location. That's just what you did, for mainstream French cinema. And this, defying that convention, said, like, no, we're going to make an action film all in studio, on sound stages, and everything's going to be built to what I want it to be. And yes, it does look like soundstage work, but it never feels cramped or claustrophobic or cheap. It definitely has sort of a heightened feel because a lot of the stages are quite large. I forget what kind of space. It was some sort of industrial space that they converted into sound stages for the film.
Yeah, it was a big like cold storage warehouse.
Yeah, they probably had to do that for the exteriors to get breath.
So that's the thing is like the director René Manzor talked about, I don't want any accidental lighting, as he called it. He's like, I want to be able to control every light source in my frame. And because of that, I think the movie is absolutely gorgeous from a lighting perspective. And it's heightened. It is total fantasy, but it knows it. And again, embraces that aspect of it. There's never an attempt here at trying to fool you with realism with the presentation of this story, because the story ends up being that the Santa Claus comes down the chimney and Thomas is hiding there and he's super excited, and there's a shot, they cut to him and there's just this total unmotivated, light source coming up from underneath Thomas, but it's because this is his magical moment. He's seeing Santa Claus. Like that, the lighting is reflecting his emotion, not the reality of the space that he's in. But in this moment, we have another character that we haven't mentioned, JR, who is Thomas's dog, who we see him playing with at the beginning of the movie. He's hunting him, Rambo style, like he's hunting his dog. And he's got, traps, like a trap door in the floor that, opens up to a net.
Not in a cruel way.
No.
This is all playful. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's still setting up that Thomas is somebody who plays at war.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's going to actually have to do it for real. So when Santa comes down and Thomas is having this angelic moment, JR comes in and starts barking and attacking Santa and is ruining it. Like Thomas is trying to it's like, no, stop, don't do this. Another thing I should say, because this is important, is that Thomas is told a piece of lore, which I think is very interesting, in that his mom says, don't stay up and try and see Santa Claus, because if you do see him, he will turn into an ogre.
Yeah. There's some interesting, I don't know if that's something she just made up, or if that's something that's, baked into French Santa Claus lore. Cause there are some subtle differences you see, like, Papa Noel or Père Noel doesn't have the kind of same costume that, we see it depicted for American audiences. He doesn't have the hat, it's a hood. And there's a moment where Pilou and Tommy are talking to Santa, quote unquote Santa, on the Minitel. And Tommy asks him, where do you live? And the answer is au ciel, which is, in the sky, in heaven. But the subtitles say the North Pole, because that's what Americans would know to be the correct answer as far as like, where does Santa Claus live?
Right.
But, in French, it's different.
So when, I don't know if that's made up lore for the movie or comes from other source material, but it infuses Thomas with belief in this magical thinking that yes, Santa's real. I'm seeing Santa come down, and now my dog's attacking him. Something's going to be wrong. And this is when the movie has its walkout moment.
Yeah.
Santa Claus grabs a cake knife and stabs the dog in the neck. And the shot that they do of this, which is apparently one take with the real dog, where it's just a perspective gag where they're, hitting the knife down on the ground. It's actually, probably 6-8 inches or something away from the dog. But the perspective makes it look, from where we're being filmed, and we're being filmed from Thomas's perspective underneath this table looking, dead on. And it looks like he stabs this dog. It's brutal.
Yeah. No, it's a total walkout moment. And this is the kind of thing that separates this movie from something you would see for American audiences. Because if this movie was adapted for American audiences, you simply wouldn't get the moment where Santa Claus takes the cake knife and stabs the dog in the dog under the jaw with it, like in one, like just one hit kill. Doggy dead, gone. Ouch. Later, he buries the dog like Ash buries his girlfriend in Evil Dead.
So now the movie is essentially a home invasion thriller, but it is done in such a heightened fantasy world way. And so much of this is achieved through the filmmaking. There's so many shots with, Dutch angles and wide angle lenses and, low POVs, because something about the production design, because I got the 4K Blu-ray that is available for this movie through Vinegar Syndrome. And Renee Manzer talked about the production design and where he said, I want you to design everything as if it is from the height perspective of a child, of our main character, because that is the way he perceives it. So
it must have had very, very tall sound stages.
Well, and if you watch the movie, you'll actually notice, those objects would actually be much smaller in real life, but because of the angle that they're doing it and the perspective, they made shelves larger, or, certain objects that he was holding bigger, because it's like, well, he's a kid, like that would be his perspective. And I think the movie is so brilliant at capturing that childlike perspective about Santa Claus and Christmas, but then turning, doing what it set out to do with its very first image, which is turning it on its head and showing you the horror nightmare version of that world.
At this point, the movie changes structure. It's like it's almost 40 minutes into the movie at this point. And it's certainly taking its time to get where it's going. But I like that. There's a lot of stuff that they have to set up character-wise and also thematically, to get to this point in the film where it's like, okay, the fight is on. And so the whole idea now, while Tommy is stuck at home with his sick and, half-blind grandfather, it's like, okay, priority number one is to get out. And so they make their attempt to escape, and, there's all these plot points of what is happening to keep them there trapped in this house with this murderer. And the whole time they're avoiding, any kind of significant conversation with the murderer as a person, because, the murderer has to remain a mystery throughout.
There's a reason why he's only credited as Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Like that. The fact that we don't know who this person is because, as far as this movie is concerned, he is Santa Claus.
Right.
He is this idea. I think there's so much interesting commentary to pick apart about this movie, about the idea of a magical figure like Santa being co-opted for consumerism and capitalism.
Yeah, and there's more interesting commentary about the consumerism and capitalism when we go through Tommy's toy room, which is the most surreal set out of all of them. It's this huge, very dark soundstage, and everything is sort of cast in silhouette except for this huge collection of toys that makes it look like a theme park fantasy land. It's so nuts. Well,
and narratively, it is explained that these are the toys of their entire, basically the men in the family. Every generation has kept their toys in here, and they've lived in this mansion a long time, and it's this secret room, and it's like this toy graveyard.
Yeah.
It's so cool. I love that set and that idea, because as soon as you see it, it's blatantly unrealistic, but it's a headspace for Tommy. It's a mental thematic place for him to retreat to. So, by the time Santa ends up finding that place and invading it, and he's going to kill the grandpa in it, it feels like, again, this attack on kind of your nostalgia.
Exactly. Well, the whole movie, thematically eventually is this killer is coming for your childhood. This is going to be a coming of age story for Thomas, but one that's delivered through violence. It's a really scary and dark narrative in that way. And in some ways, I think people can make an argument for this as an unpleasant film, or just not a good time. And I totally get where they're coming from.
I mean, the dog scene alone, I think, makes that argument for some people.
Well, particularly American audiences for
Sure.
For whom dog killing is total walkout. And, I get it. But there is just, such an inherent cruelty, I think, in this film. And I think that makes for some really amazing moments. But I get the argument that people might make that this is maybe a little too cruel, a little too dark. It's not necessarily the feel good movie of Christmas, but I still think it's, immaculately styled. There's this really cool scene at the midpoint of the film where the killer, Santa, is chasing Tommy out onto the rooftops of, this big fantasy home, and Tommy is stranded out there in the snow. And there's this incredible wide shot of Tommy slipping and sort of hanging from the gutter. But in order to accomplish that effect shot, they actually hand animated Tommy's silhouette for a brief moment. And they make no effort to hide that is a hand animated silhouette, hanging from the side, but it's beautiful effects work nevertheless. And it's at that point that we figure out that, the mom is on her way home, finally, in the middle of the night, coming home from work on Christmas Eve.
I will cop to this about the movie. When the movie becomes the home invasion movie, it is pretty much just a succession of different attack scenes. Like there is not necessarily a ton of narrative progress going on, but the tone and the mood is continuing to press on. Like when they first try to escape, the Grandpa and Thomas, they get to this car that they were fixing up earlier. And they open it up, open up the garage, and who's standing right there is Santa Claus. And, arms wide open with a giant backlight, like spotlight behind him. It's so wonderful. I love these. It's images. Like this movie crafts constant images. And having watched some of the special features on the disc, it backs your argument about this being a vision, because they show the storyboards and it's like a 1-to-1 where it's like they plan this out immaculately from a visual standpoint.
It seems very clear that René Manzur had really thought this movie out before he ever made it. And so, he knew exactly what he wanted. And the result of that, I think, as a directorial exercise, or just as an exercise in the technique of filmmaking, is like a resounding success. That's, such a cool thing. There's hardly a rough aspect of the movie. I think, the movie has its sort of dated charms in some ways, but it's still really impressive, in all technical aspects. There are a couple of weird music cues here and there, but otherwise, lighting wise, everything cinematographically is cool. There's so much, low angle, sort of predatory angles. You almost feel like the characters are being stalked through their own home by like a jungle cat. They do that stuff really, really well. And, like you said, it's just a succession of sequences at this point of, Santa is stalking them. They find a way to get away. They go to a different part of the house. Tommy uses the technology that he's installed in the household to monitor Santa or try to get some sort of tactical advantage. They bury the dog, or, the grandpa's sick and they have to get his insulin. It's all these different scenarios that arise and they have to deal with them. And that is, once you get past that 40-minute mark of the movie, like that's the bulk of the running time. And then there's the mom's quest home, that is interrupted. Her car runs off the road at one point because it's snowy.
With a great shot of the car leaning into the camera lens as it leans off the edge. Apparently that was the director himself had to man that shot because nobody else wanted to do it. It was
I believe it.
And, it's a very scary shot. And again, it was a one take thing. And he talks about it. He's like, it was one take also because I was not going to do a second take of that. It was terrifying. And so we had to get it in one take. And he talked about that a couple times. Same thing with the death of the dog. He's like, I put a stress on set for certain shots where it's like, we're getting this in one take because there's no way we're going to be able to get what I need with a second take. Mm-hmm. He wanted to scare the dog a certain way in that moment. And he's like, as soon as you do that, the dog's going to be up to the game. If you try and do it again, it's going to know what you're trying to do. So you only have one shot. Same thing with that car. When that front of that car leans to that camera and it looks like it's about to just jump out of the screen with how close it gets.
It's very dangerous. It actually reminded me of how well executed the T-Rex attack is in Jurassic Park. With the car leaning off the side and, plummeting and, it reminds me of those setups and the danger that you can sense in every setup. It's really just so well executed.
Well, and that's something I find so fascinating about this movie, because it barely, I think it played for a weekend in France. It was made more to be sold internationally. You know, he was like, it didn't have a theatrical run in France. He's like, it played for a weekend and was done. And he talks about his influences being much more kind of like he directly referenced Spielberg. He's like, Spielberg, I think, is one of the best, because even though his films can be, you know, technically incredible, there is a tone and a mood that he's able to weave into that is consistent and that creates its own little kind of spectacular world. And I really feel that Dial Code Santa Claus has, of the time, like it's of its time, kind of, you know, late 80s right into the early 90s. It's riffing on a lot of contemporary stuff. I mean, this is really kind of, you know, the post MTV generation. There's a lot of kind of music video sensibility in this movie, in terms of, again, music videos of the time.
Agreed. Yeah. The soundstage look with the sort of big empty rooms and things like that, you know, large spaces, really makes it feel like a music video. But also you can see the influences from, you know, popular American cinema, you know, Poltergeist, you know, there's definitely some kind of Poltergeist energy in the film. And then, of course, the action films in the 80s, you know, which Tommy clearly has a love for. And then, you know, there was what was going on in international cinema at the time that was also influencing what was going on a bit. But again, not a whole lot of influence from French cinema. This just doesn't feel like a French film.
No, yeah, I mean, again,
I think the Frenchest thing about it is Minitel.
Well, again, that was kind of purposeful. Manzor talked about, like, you know, there was a certain kind of accepted way of making movies at the time. And specifically in French cinema, genre cinema was not super popular at the time. And he specifically wanted to make genre stories. And he specifically he's like, I want to film inside of a studio, which was not cool. Like, according to him, you know, like, if you wanted to be in the filmmaking and the critical circles, you were supposed to shoot cinema verite and on location and with natural lighting and all this kind of stuff. And he wanted to do the complete opposite. Like, in a way, construction-wise, Dial Code Santa Claus is an extremely commercially made movie. In doing that, it actually allowed it to be, I think, more artful, and in terms of the way it was utilizing the language of cinema. Because, like we say, after a point, the movie is one thing. It is Thomas versus Santa. Like, that's it. But it never gets boring, because it's always doing something visually interesting. The combination of the music, or when he decides to use slow motion to make a moment seem more like a nightmare, kind of dreamlike. All of these tools, it's just so clear the tools that he wanted to use to tell this particular story. And there's, you know, I think there's base pleasures to be had in the movie when he does finally start fighting back against Santa. You know, there's a bunch of trap moments. Like, there's a tripwire that sets off two darts that jab into Santa's neck. That's great.
It's a fun gag.
When he lights him on fire with the flaming the flaming dart.
Yeah.
So cool. Great slow motion shot. Great shot of the flaming dart flying through the air. They
really beat up this killer. You know, they really make the killer go through hell. You know, it's not on like Home Alone cartoonish levels. It's a little bit more gritty and nasty. I think more akin to like what the Ghostface killers go through in Scream. But it is in this section where I think a lot of people would sort of question the tone again, because it's like, well, does the film want me to have fun with this? Because it just had the character hit a low point where he's carrying his dead dog, and he's like crying, but also there's this really silly song playing on the soundtrack. It's like, does the movie want me to take this seriously or think this is a silly cartoon?
I love that song.
And I do believe that the movie wants me to take this very, very seriously, but it also is using cartoon fantasy storytelling to accomplish some of that. And I think people would find that kind of an odd mix, but I think for this film, it works really, really well. And the ending really doubles down in that darkness, because, you know, once this final showdown happens and there's this really thrilling scene outside in the exterior where Tommy finally manages to get a hold of a gun. I think it's a policeman's gun.
Oh, well, but before we get, because there's a couple things I want to note. I definitely want to highlight the performances of the two leads, because I think they deserve highlighting. I think they're both, I mean, especially Alan Lane, the young child actor. He gets put through some rigorous stuff, and I think the performance that he gives is flat out great.
Yeah, he's a visual effects producer now.
Yes.
He's worked on a whole bunch of blockbuster movies.
And Patrick Florsheim, who plays Santa Claus, it's so interesting finding out about him. Apparently he was a big voice actor and would do French dubbing for American stars like Jeff Bridges and Robin Williams. Like, he was their French dubbing voice.
Oh, cool.
And they were doing dubbing on the previous film that Rene Mansour did. And when he saw him in the he was like, he was just an incredible actor. And he's like, I wrote the role for him. Like, it was, both of the roles, the two lead roles, were written for the actors that portrayed them. And I think that's part of the reason why they get such amazing performances out of them. I mean, Patrick Florsheim in this is so terrifying. And when we talk about it, because there's surprisingly a glut of killer Santa movies, it's criminal that he is not talked about as one of the best, because his character is just so mysterious. When he finally actually gets Thomas, he grabs him, and it's the first time he's ever touched him. And it's like, what is he going to do? Like, he sliced at him earlier. Is he going to kill him? No, he acts like they're playing hide and seek.
Right.
He's like, I found you. Now you find me. Like, count to 10. It's like, whoa. It creeps the hell out of me.
Yeah, it doesn't come across as a way to artificially extend the running time. It's this new mystery that's been added, like, what the fuck is going on with this guy? But ultimately, like, the movie delivers a really hard answer at the end by not giving us an answer about his motivations.
Nope.
So this showdown outside, where Tommy manages to finally, get a gun on this guy, and there's this moment where he's got him dead to rights, and Tommy says, "Why?" And there's no answer. There's never an answer.
And then he has to try and shoot him.
Unsuccessfully.
Unsuccessfully, yes. Eventually, Grandpa's the one who delivers the killing shot. Again, it's like, we have no idea who this person was, why, like, other than what we saw him be motivated by his direct intentions were never made clear. The ending is the theme brought back home. Thomas is sitting over the corpse of this Santa Claus, and he's totally, 1,000-yard stare, and has now actually experienced war, outside of the game of it. And when his mom comes and is trying to comfort him, he says, it was my fault. Like, I wanted to see Santa. This is my fault.
Well, at this point, he still firmly believes that this is Santa Claus turned into an ogre. And, he did something that his mom warned him not to do. He hasn't, at this point, realized that this is some just deranged guy who, for unknowable reasons decided to come after him. And that's the thematic statement, is ultimately, like, tragedy can strike, and often there's no real good reason why tragedy strikes or why these insane things happen to us in our lives. But nevertheless, they warp us. And there is no happy ending to this film. I as much as I would love to say that, like, it cuts to Christmas next year where everybody's sitting around and slicing the Bush Noel. And
no, the final image of the movie I kind of love so much, because it's the camera kind of, dollies over the corpse of Santa, and his hand is resting at the base of the fireplace, and there's just a pair of boots, like you put your boots next to the fireplace to warm it up during the winter. And that's the final image. Which,
strange.
Which we saw earlier, was this magical image of Santa's boots coming down the fireplace, chimney and everything. Now it's this dark, empty, almost mundane image of, again, like the magic, like, we have shown you that the magic is really dark and twisted. Like, as soon as you realize what the adult world is, it's all bad. Like, and I definitely can see this, like you're saying, being a little crueler than people would kind of expect from a, kid versus killer Santa movie.
Right.
But that's, again, I it's something I really resonate with certain Christmas movies with, is like, it's getting at the darker heart of Christmas. And it doesn't necessarily need to be cynical, but I like that. I like also that this movie ends with Thomas still believing that it's Santa Claus. I think an easier ending is him realizing, like, yeah, this person was crazy, and that's his, coming of age, oh, now I realize the horrors of the adult world, after it's intruded upon my childlike fantasy. It's more complicated and sad and scary that he still believes this is Santa Claus.
Yeah. Yeah. The film leaves, I think, in an especially brutal moment. And it's a complicated ending, that I think is still with me. We watched this on Monday. It's Friday now. I'm still thinking about it. It's a complicated and messy thing, but that's really the statement the movie is making, is that, like, look, reality is complicated and messy and disappointing and is going to warp you. And we cling to fantasy.
Like Christmas. Like, Christmas is a fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Is meant to be a reprieve from, the dark winter, but it's all about how much we invest emotionally in that fantasy.
Yeah. And I do want to double down on, I don't think we did just enough to just how gorgeous this movie looks. I mean, that's hard to come across, in audio form, but I highly recommend you watching this movie. Like I said, it's available in the US on the streaming platform Shudder under the title Deadly Games. And you just there are just shots in this movie that linger with me. And just, again, visual images. The degradation of Santa over the movie is great. By the ending, he looks like a swamp monster.
Yeah, he looks like Ash in Evil Dead 2. He's all covered in crust and cuts and nastiness. He's all burned and muddy.
I mean, he looks like he belongs on the cover of an EC comic. Like, yeah. It's that kind of over the top, but again, it's genuinely creepy. The movie is really effective when it wants to be horror. The movie's effective, I think, when it wants to be fantasy. I'm glad that this now has a stateside home video release. I'm glad it's on a streaming platform, a well-known one, because this movie needs a cult following. Like, this is absolutely the kind of movie that is not going to be, it's not going to suddenly pop up on all the, hey, watch Home Alone and Die Hard, Christmas lists of movies.
Sure.
This is a weird one, but it's the best kind of weird one.
All right. And if you want to find more weird movies like this one, the best place for you to go for that is the shelf. You would go to the shelf where you could pull off movies to pair with this one. The shelf is a collaborative thing. It's something we do with you. If you go to GenreVision.com and you look at the posts for the podcast episodes on the main page, you can comment and tell us what you would like to pull off your shelf to pair with Deadly Games, aka Dial Code Santa Claus, aka 3615 Code Père Noël.
If you do leave your shelf picks on the post for GenreVision.com, we will feature them on the following episode.
You want to go first, Drew? What are you pulling off the shelf?
Well, I wanted another twisted Christmas movie because I like these kind of movies, and one that I'm actually starting to come back to. I just rewatched it recently after really seeing it for the first time, I think last year. This is Christmas Evil, also known as You Better Watch Out. This is also available on Shudder. This movie was pretty much saved solely by John Waters because it played for a very, very short time back in 1980. It was a tiny little independent movie made in like New Jersey, and would have probably disappeared if John Waters had not seen it and proclaimed it as the greatest Christmas movie ever made. This is not going to be a way to sell it to Travis, but it is fair to say that it is kind of the Taxi Driver of evil Santa movies.
Jesus.
In that the story is about a guy, what's his name? Harry Stadling, played by Brandon Maggart, who is Fiona Apple's dad. There's some fun facts about this movie. He believes in Santa as a kid, and one night he sees Santa come down the chimney and leave the presents and everything. But then he comes back downstairs later and he catches Santa kissing mommy somewhere on her body, and something happens in him. Later, the movie flashes forward, and he is this guy who might believe he is Santa Claus. He keeps record books of good and bad boys and girls in the neighborhood and writes down everything about them. He works at a toy factory.
It's just like a Jeff Foxworthy joke. You know how you know you're Santa Claus?
Well, the movie, I think the reason the movie probably didn't really catch on or anything is it's not a slasher movie. And if you look at the poster where it's, a Santa Claus with an axe going down the chimney, this is also before Silent Night, Deadly Night. You expect it to be like, yeah, killer Santa's going around killing people. It's not really that. It is more the taxi driver thing where this person believes he's Santa Claus and decides to be a moral arbiter. He is passing out gifts to kids at this hospital, but then he's finding the evil adults and punishing them, sometimes by killing them.
Got it. So he's like a Twitter user.
It's there's some interesting actors you'll recognize. Jeffrey DeMunn, it plays his brother as one of the prime characters. Ray Barry, who you will definitely recognize. Most people probably from Walk Hard. He's Dewey Cox's dad. The wrong kid died.
Oh yeah, the wrong kid died.
A number of those kind of actors kind of pop up. Mark Margolis is in it at one point. I think it's really beautifully shot for, it's probably shot on like 16 millimeter or something. I think there's a lot of really kind of haunting Christmas images. There's this great neighborhood shot where there's just these, rows and rows of light up snowmen. And it just looks like something out of a nightmare to me. I don't want to spoil the very ending because the very ending is something kind of incredible. It's a big, big, bold thematic statement to the movie.
This is Christmas Evil, right?
Christmas Evil, also known as You Better Watch Out. Recommend it, but again, it's grungy. I mean, it's a movie made in New Jersey in like 1979, for God's sake. Mm-hmm. You got to know what you're going in with that. But I think there's a vision, there's a story, there's something unique here. And I'm finding myself more and more gravitating towards it with each Christmas. So if Dial Code Santa Claus sounded like something that you'd like, if you want another kind of out there, not just a slasher, because I'm not really big on Silent Night, Deadly Night, but if you want something that's a little bit artier, I would say check out Christmas Evil. But Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Dial Code Santa Claus?
Guillermo del Toro's Cronos is a movie that came to mind when I was watching Dial Code Santa Claus. There's a similar kind of stage-bound feel. There's a similar sort of, I think, approach to the filmmaking in so many respects. Cronos is a film that I think starts on Christmas and it heads toward New Year's eventually. It is a December and early January movie, so I think it's temporally appropriate, but also it's very direct about its themes. Just like Dial Code Santa Claus, it is really pretty out on Front Street with what it wants you to think the movie is about. It is not a mystery, and I think it in a similar way is going to embrace a lot of its genre feelings. Like even when it doesn't quite feel like a horror movie. It is. But even when it doesn't quite feel like a horror movie, it's delivering on so much, interesting genre style, just like Rene Manzor, I think Del Toro is the kind of guy who will embrace the artifice of cinematic flair to get a point across. I was reminded of Crimson Peak, for instance, when, the main character in Crimson Peak goes through periods where she's feeling well and when she's not feeling well. And then when she's not feeling well, they take all the furniture on those sets and they increased it, I think, by like 25%. So like there's this big wingback chair that she sits in and several times in the film. And then early on when she sits in it, it's a smaller chair. And then when she's feeling small and weak, they make everything bigger. Mm-hmm. So it's just a really fun directorial flourish. And it's things like that Dial Code Santa Claus does really well. So anyway, Cronos by Guillermo del Toro.
Go listen to our episode on Cronos.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we got to do the listener shelf picks for our last episode on Mystics in Bali. Eric Fuchs went with Lady Terminator, which is made by the same director. That might make its way onto the show. I don't know. I don't know if I can get Travis to watch Lady Terminator. We'll see.
I don't know. I liked Mystics in Bali, so he's one for one.
Lady Terminator is a whole nother ball game, but we'll see. We'll see. Mr. Milksteak went with Bride of Reanimator and Life Force. Go listen to our Life Force episode.
Yep.
JT had a great shelf pick, The Manitou, which I might try and use as one of my gimmies one of these days, because that's a wackadoo movie. Stephen Nesbella went with Beyond the Door. Go listen to our Beyond the Door episode. He said that the funny dubbing reminded him of the kids from Beyond the Door, which are great. That was a really fun movie. And then Mega Man Juno went with some episodes from Tales from the Crypt, The Reluctant Vampire, and Judy, You're Not Yourself Today. Good episodes. So thank you, everybody, for the shelf picks. Love seeing those every week, and looking forward to next week's shelf picks. Let's do some currently consuming.
Nom, 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
Our great friend Danny Ryan and you and I decided to have a holiday get together virtually. The three of us watched Jingle All the Way together. We all decided to just press play at the same time and watch the movie and react to it in real time through Discord. And boy, was that a lot of fun. It was my first time seeing Jingle All the Way. And I think that movie, despite being like really bizarre, accomplishes what it sets out to do. It's a story about a dad who's fucking up and trying to make things better for his son. I think that arc works, even despite the movie just being kind of stupid and silly. But it's pretty well made in terms of direction. Arnold is a good schmuck in the role. I like him playing a really big fuck up in the movie because he's such a fuck up. I like seeing him as a really bad hero. He's just really bad at his job. So I think he's very well cast in that. Stylistically, it's pretty darn good. And the film has also seen a recent upgrade to a very good 4K HDR scan. This movie was shot on really nice film stock and the elements were in good shape. It looks really good. Yeah, so Jingle All the Way. Consider me jingled to completion on this one. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I watched Jingle All the Way quite a few times as a kid growing up and was very excited to share that experience with y'all. And to come around and realize, like, you know what, I think I go to bat for this movie. Like, I had obviously had a really fun time watching with y'all, but it's the same. It's like, yeah, this movie's, for kind of the reputation it has as being unremarkable and bad, it's like, this movie's crazy.
Yeah, it's too nuts and dark and strange for me to write off entirely.
Yeah, I vibe with that. So, well, on my end, I saw the new David Fincher film Mank on Netflix about, ostensibly, it's about the writing of Citizen Kane from screenwriter Herman Mankiewicz. I wrote a review for this, and we can link to that if you want to see. So I'm going to kind of do my capsule review of this. Mank is very good, but it's also like, I think I described it as like, it's like one of those movies you see in a movie. And I think I mentioned like Angels with Filthy Souls from Home Alone. Sure. Where it's like, you watch this and you're like, oh man, I'd love to see that movie. This is that movie where it's like, oh, because it's such a clear desire to do a pastiche of what if we made this movie, in 1936, when it takes place, or, one of them, it takes place kind of throughout the 30s into the 40s. What if we made this story, but did it in that style? And because it's David Fincher, technically he's pulling it off like nobody's business. It's like the most incredible pastiche you'll ever see, but it's still a pastiche. And then there's Gary Oldman. And Gary Oldman has delivered incredible performances. He's a very particular kind of character actor.
He is, yeah. And it's in a particularly interesting casting for this because he's actually much older than Herman Mankiewicz was at the time when he actually wrote Citizen Kane. I think Mankiewicz was in his 30s.
Sure.
And Gary Oldman is like twice that.
Well, and the thing being that his performance, I think, is the shakiest thing about the movie, because the movie is unabashedly aware of itself as a piece of fiction, as a piece of fantasy, of Hollywood fantasy. There is a big meta moment that happens that probably will weird a lot of viewers out, because it's not calling the biggest attention to it because it's pretty much dialogue based. But when it happens, you're like, oh yeah, like this movie knows what it's doing. And it's a fascinating story, the creation of the movie being that it was written by Fincher's father, years ago, and then he eventually passed away. And Fincher has been trying to make it for a very long time. And while it is about the writing of Citizen Kane, it's about a lot more than that. It's certainly another kind of, hey, weren't the movies, wasn't the movie making atmosphere so great back then? It's that, but at the same time, it is like, but we're going to be really honest about what these businesses were and who these characters were in terms of from the perspective of the character of Herman Mankiewicz. Mm-hmm. Like Louis B. Mayer is an absolute villain in the movie. And he, like the actor that played him, I believe his name is Arliss Howard. He's my favorite thing in the movie.
Arliss Howard's great. He plays a great villain in Lost World Jurassic Park.
That's right. He is phenomenal in Mank. He is my favorite performance in the movie. But the movie's not really about the writing of Citizen Kane. It gets vehemently political to the point where it's like, oh yeah, they're talking about how MGM would host GOP, they were hosting like a GOP party for like some election and stuff like that. It's like, this is not being subtle in that regard. And that's very encouraging. But it's in a weird way, it's like the most whimsical movie Fincher's ever made, probably after Benjamin Button.
He doesn't strike me as a particularly whimsical guy.
No, I mean that's why I say it's like the only other thing that kind of lands on that is Benjamin Button, and he did Benjamin Button after his father died, specifically for his father, I believe. It was in memoriam to him, I think. This movie is. So it's this whimsical look at, a Hollywood that probably never actually was, but it's our, collective Hollywood fantasy. But also at the same time, it's Charles Dance's great casting as William Randolph Hearst. He's just an absolute, you just have to cut to him and it's like, yep, menacing, evil, don't like him. That's all you got to do. He doesn't have to say a word. And then when he speaks, of course, it's great because he's Charles Dance.
Oh, reuniting with David Fincher for the first time since Alien 3.
That's true. I don't know. The movie's not as entrancing as I think it wants to be, but it's so exceptionally made at what it's trying to do. Amanda Seyfried's great in it. I think
that's what I've heard. Yeah.
I think this is one of her best roles because Oldman's the only one who kind of seems to be in his own movie because it's like the movie's about him. So his wavelength changes, and he's also got to play drunk, which is always just difficult to fake being drunk as an actor.
Well, I just imagine, Gary Oldman has had a very public struggle with alcoholism and other addictions. So it's like, oh, that's interesting.
I'm sure, that might have factored into his reasons for playing this part because the alcoholism is a direct thing that they continually hit on throughout the movie. The way they utilize Orson Welles is really cool. He's essentially the devil.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, I got to see this.
The way they show him and Mank either meeting or kind of agreeing to embark on Citizen Kane together. He's dressed like the devil at the end of The Witch.
Oh, little Black Phillip energy.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, like this person's clearly going to be the downfall of this character. It's a fascinating movie. Like I gave it an overall positive review, but I think Oldman's performance is it teeters the movie too much. And I think after a while, like the pastiche element is played out. It's like, okay, you're doing this really well, but was this all you really wanted to do? You just wanted to like mimic these movies the best you possibly could. It's like, okay, like you did it. Good job. You did it really well, but
yeah.
What else? So I don't know. I called it, I said it's one of the best head scratchers of the year, but it's still a head scratcher.
Well, I like that Fincher's not, he's making head scratchers still. Like that's interesting to me.
Yeah, it's not going to be narratively confusing to people. I think people, they literally, the on-screen text for scene transitions are literally typing out, interior hotel room night, like, instead of dates, to give you your dates and stuff.
Interesting.
And it'll say, like interior, MGM studio, 1936, parentheses flashback. Like it's telling you, like, to help you with the time jumping around, which of course is something they acknowledge being a part of Citizen Kane's story and how that's going to confuse people. It's a big experimental weirdo art film, but kind of stuck in wanting to be an Oscar bait movie. So it is fascinating. I give it that. But I don't know, man. I think it's one that is going to be so niche, even for Fincher's kind of crowd. So I'll be interested to see kind of what the overall response will be to it, especially for the Netflix crowd who are not going to vibe with it at all. At all. There's no way.
It's in black and white. So, yeah, it's in black and white. So immediately it's going to make a whole bunch of people go, eh.
Yeah.
So, anyway, is that all we got?
That's all for Currently Consuming. So we just got to wrap things up with our
comment of the week.
And it was a little tough to pick one because you guys had great comments talking about Mystics in Bali. And some of you saw it for the first time because of our show, which it's like, wow, that's so flattering. And part of what we're trying to do here with GenreVision. But the one that made me smile, I have to give it to JT, who said, I think it was the mouse puking that finally got me in this movie's corner.
To be fair, it's not a mouse that pukes. It is a woman who pukes up a mouse in a shower. It is an utterly insane moment in Mystics in Bali. And yeah, it's something I'd never heard about before. But now you know.
Yes, and we thoroughly recommend Mystics in Bali and our episode on it. And, mouse puking. But no, thank you so much. Love seeing the comments every week, and hope we'll be back next week when we do our crossover Finflix episode for the Finflix Christmas special on Jaws the Revenge, which means we got to watch Jaws the Revenge. But I think we're going to have a really fun time. I'm looking forward to that quite a bit.
Oh yeah, me too.
So we want to thank you all so much for listening. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision /Finflix.